Junkyard LS, Calford Cam. Let's do this. Alright, so to do this cam swap, you're going to need a little bit more than just the cam. You're going to need a new oil pump. This is a junkyard motor. It's done about 90,000 Ks, so this is cheap insurance really. We've got the front of the motor off, we may as well replace it while we're there. We're also going to do a timing row set. We've gone with a single row because this motor's it's never going to be a huge high performance motor, so single row is enough for us, and it removes the need for doing the machining on the inside of the timing cover if you go with a double row. We're also doing a set of springs. These are some Calford beehives to suit our application, and while we're doing those we'll also replace the steels just because the old ones are probably worn out. And we've got a full front gasket kit. You can buy this as a kit so you don't have to think about ordering them separately. You've got your crank, your timing cover, your oil and water pump, and you're also going to need a new crank bolt, so we went with ARP with that one. They're fairly cheap. And of course the cam itself, which is a CNC cut high performance cam from Calford. We've gone with the 108D. There is more extreme options obviously, but with this motor being a mild motor in a car with a brake booster, we're not going to have vacuum problems, and it's just going to be an easy driver. This is just a cruiser. It's not a drag car. It's not trying to be a race car. This is purely just a street car. So we've gone fairly mild with the cam, but with the heads we've got, which is stock LS1, this is the cam that Calford recommends. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to do is get this pulley off. This is pressed on, so you're going to need pullers to get it off. So the way we're doing it is not ideal. You'd really want a puller with a 6-inch reach on it, but those are not readily available in New Zealand, and with shipping at the moment, the easiest solution we could come up with was getting a 150mm one locally and pressing off the crank bolt itself. So you loosen the bolt, bring it out say 10mm, then pull the pulley out, and then once that gets seated again, bring this off, bring the bolt out even further, and just continue that process until the pulley comes off. It works fine, it's just a little bit more clumsy than if you had the 6-inch on there. You could just bring the pulley straight off. In order to access the push rods and also to swap our springs out, we need to take the rocket gear off. Now, that is an 8mm bolt in there. You just got to make sure that there's no preload on the ones when you loosen them. So you just turn the motor over to make sure that there's a bit of wiggle in them, which will be 2 at a time. They'll work independently. Okay, so now we need to swap in our new beehives and our stem seals. So you're going to have to compress each spring down and take out the 2 retainer clips, and then the retainer itself will come off and the spring will come out. So obviously we're going to need to hold the valves up somehow while we do this, otherwise they're going to drop into the cylinder. So there's a few different methods. One, we actually insert compressed air into the spark plug hole. It pressurizes the combustion chamber and it will hold 2 valves up. There's also guys who like to stuff rags and all sorts of rope and stuff in there, which is not my preferred method. What I'm going to do today is actually the simplest way, is the TDC method. So we'll ensure that each piston is at TDC, which will stop the valves dropping down, and then I'll be able to whoop off the retainers. Doing it this way is the simplest, and if you don't have a compressor at home, obviously you're not going to have compressed air, so this way is probably the easiest DIY method. Okay, so the easiest way to find TDC without worrying about with the timing gear is to take your spark plug out and turn the motor over, and you'll see the piston raise into the spark plug hole, and you could use a screwdriver or something and delicately put it down there, and as you can see it's just hitting the piston straight away. So I know that if I take off these retainers, these valves have got nowhere to go basically. Okay, so now we need to compress the spring down. There's a few different tools you can actually buy which bolt into here. There's a few different configurations, but I've actually made a very simple tool, which is half an old ring spanner that I had, and using a spare bolt that I had, which is the same metric thread as that. Essentially that will just go in there, the bolt's on like that, and the ring spanner, just centralize that over the retainer, tighten it down, and it will compress the spring. grab out the two halves of your retaining clip and loosen that back off. Like so. There you have it. See, the valve doesn't move, it's just staying nice and up. I can push that down and you can just feel hitting the piston straight away. In the bin, we'll keep the retainer and we'll remove the seal. And to install the new seal, all you want to do is make sure the top of your valve's got a little bit of oil on it, and just gently press it down and it will just press into place like so, and done. It's a fairly straightforward process, just can be quite tedious getting these old ones off. As you can see, the old seals were just had it, they shouldn't be in two pieces like that. There you go. Next we'll install the new springs. It just seats over top, the retainer slots in there, and you'll grab your tool. Now you just want to compress the spring down enough to give you the room to slot your two pieces of your retainer clip in there. As you just slot back in. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do before you go ripping anything off is line your timing gear back up. So on the crank pulley here, there's a timing mark there, and you can also just see down here, which you can't see, but the bottom crank pulley. You want to line those two up just so you have everything back in the spot where it should be. We'll put your new timing gear on. So before you go ripping off the timing gear, you want to make sure that you rotate your crank until your two timing marks meet up. It's just going to make life easier when you go to put the new stuff in. So we'll leave that on. We'll take this off and get into our cam swap. And it's worth noting that the locating pin on the cam is pointing at 3 o'clock. So when you install your new cam, you want to make sure that that's pointing at 3 o'clock again. It's just going to make the whole timing process a lot less painful. To get to the cam itself, there's a retaining plate you got to take off. It's just 4 10mm. So now we've revealed the cam itself. You want to use some water pump pulley bolts just because they're nice and long, easy to work with. Notice there's 2 holes here, and each of those runs the length of the engine. So what we're going to do before we pull the cam out, we're going to rotate it twice, and we're going to slot a rod into each of these. So what's actually going to happen when we rotate the cam, it's going to push all the lifters up into the buckets, and then we're going to slot the rod in, and it's going to stop the lifters from falling out and into the valley once the cam is pulled out. It's a very important step, because if you don't do that and they fall in there, well, you're going to be heads off. Alright, so now you got your 2 rods in place. You want to start slowly rotating and pulling the cam out, trying not to damage anything on the way up. Now before you insert your new bump stick into your motor, you want to take those 2 water pump bolts that you had in your old stick, put them in the front, and your camshaft will be supplied with some lube. You want to make sure all your bearing and your lobe surfaces are nicely covered. Just put a bit on all of them, don't be scared, there's plenty in there. This will just help protect everything on first startup. Alright, now it's time to slide the new stick in. You want to do this very gently, just rotating it as you go. Should go in very easily. Like before, you want to make sure that that locating pin is pointing at 3 o'clock. Now it'll be safe to pull these out. They've done their job. Alright, so first step to going back together is the cam retainer plate. The 4 10 mils on here are 18 foot-pounds. So grab out your little torque wrench. So this Crower single row is an adjustable timing gear set. So there'll be 2 sets of markings. There's a set on the inner keyed spline here, which works on the keyway on the crank, and then there's the markings, your timing markings on the outer. So what you want to be doing is the outer 0 needs to be marking up with the 0 on the top pulley, and your keyway is always going to sit in the 0 there. And then once we get that on, then we can check we can dial the cam in and adjust it to suit. So that just slides straight on, and then there's also the oil pump drive which slides on top. So once the top pulley's on, you've got your 2 zeros lining up there. We'll bolt these 3 bolts in, then we can check the timing on that and advance or retard the timing to suit. But given these modern CNC profile cams, we're probably going to be pretty much on the money. 3 cam bolts are 26 foot-pounds. The last piece of the puzzle is getting the right length push rod. Now these 7.4 stock ones are not going to be long enough now with the cam that we've got in here. Unfortunately, we don't have the adjustable checker rod here because it hasn't shown up in the mail. But if you were to have one, all you simply do is slot it in the hole. We'll take a educated guess that this is going to probably need to be about 50 thou longer. So we'd wind it out about 10 turns, drop it in the hole, and then you chuck your rocker on, tighten down to 0 lash, and you check. So there'll be a slight amount of side to side movement, but no up and down. If it can rock up and down, then it's not long enough. You take it out, you lengthen it, put it back in until you get to the point where there's no up and down and it's just the side to side. So then that will give you the length of the push rod, and then you're going to want to add to that your desirable preload, and that'll give you the length you need. So you take the push rod once you got it the right length, take it down to your local automotive store, and you'll be able to order a set of custom length push rods. And you want to make sure you add to that the preload that you want. And happy days, you'll have a cam swap done in the garage at home.